always a great delight in reading a novel which flows like milk.
Science fiction readers, of course, or fantasy readers as well, are used to kind of having to interpret bits of Elvish and all sorts of nonsense. Usually what we do is skip those bits.
That language itself should be regarded not as a transparent medium, but should be to some extent opaque.
You can't do that with Ridley Walker. You've got to stick there. You've got to follow the words. Let him take you into this world.
In Hoban's book, Ridley Walker, there was a most bold conception of the problems of building a civilization after disaster.
I could not get through the impenetrable prose. I did try reading it out loud.
And the ultimate boldness was being willing to invent a language appropriate to the situation of his novel.
The language was so fractured and different and so far from what I recognise as English.
It's an audience, you see. Can you persuade an audience to take that novel? This is where we start compromising.
Am I supposed to be playing a game with the author? Is he showing me something and I'm supposed to work it out?
But Ridley Walker was a fine example of what the novel can do. It should be more than a culprit. It should be read by many.
And the knowing of the night is gone.
Listening to the dog howling afterwards from the wind, wuthering and wearying and nattering in the oak leaves, looking at the moon all cold and white and lonesome, Lorna said to me, "You know, Ridley, there's something in us, it don't have no name."
I said, "What thing is that?" She said, "It's some kind of thing. It ain't us, but yet it's in us. It's looking out through our eye holes. Maybe you don't take no notice of it, only sometimes. Say you get woke up sudden in the middle of the night. One minute you're asleep, and the next you're on your feet with a spear in your hand. Well, it weren't you put that spear in your hand. It were that other thing what's looking out through your eye holes. It ain't you, nor it don't even know your name. It's in us, lorn and lone, and sheltering how it can." I said, "If it's in every one of us, there's more than one of it. There's got to be a many-in. There's got to be a million and more. Well, if there's such a many-in of it, why is it lone then? Why is it lone?" She said, "Because the many-in and the million, it's all one thing. It don't have nothing together with. You look at lichens on a stone, it's all them tiny many-ins of it, and maybe each part of it might think it's separate, only we can see it's all one thing. That's how it is with what we are. It's all one girt thing, bigger nor the world, and lorn and lone and lonesome. I don't think I took all that much notice of it when I'd been young. Now I'm old, I notice it more. Well, I can't say for certain no more if I had any of them things in my mind before she told me. But ever since then, it seems like they always been there. Seems like I've been always thinking on that thing in us, what thinks us, but it don't think like us. Our whole life is an idea we didn't think of, nor we don't know what it is. What a way to live. That's why I finally come to writing all this down, thinking on what the idea of us might be, thinking on that thing what's in us, lorn and lone and lonesome.
the process of making this, I've introduced 3 people to the book to try and induce them to read it, and therefore kind of interview them as new readers. And one of them didn't like it. One of them refused to go past page 2, and one absolutely loves it. I was saying this.
My first experience with it was walking into a bookstore here in Austin long ago, when there was such a thing as used bookstores and bookstores that specialized in out-of-print things and hard-to-find things, and literally just saw the name Riddley Walker on the spine of a book and thought, that's an interesting name, and I pulled it down and I opened it and I started reading, and I recognized the language.
And what immediately struck me, of course, was the language. I was just absolutely intrigued by what he does with language, imagining this broken down language, like walking into the ruins of a cathedral.
Well, I think that's, that's part of my feeling about the language used in Riddley Walker. It is shockingly degraded, in a sense, what the inheritance was from the contemporary culture. Spelling has gone to pot, grammar has gone to pot. And I think with that, the way in which people think has changed and kind of degraded a little bit as well. But that's still that attempt to make meaning, however broken the language is.
Hoban did draw on Old English and Middle English a lot for Riddley speak. I suspect what he did first off, though I haven't confirmed, is he chucked out all Latin words. So he chucked out anything post 1066 when English starts to become an argot of Old English and French.
That's linguistics, isn't it? Historical linguistics. Maybe we need another expert, Peter.
I put my hand in the muck and I reach it down and come up with something. It were a show figure, like the ones in the Eusa show. Wooden head and hands and the rest of it cloth. All of it gone black and showman's hand still in it. Cut off, just a little way up the wrist. A grown-up hand. This here figure though, it weren't like no other figure I ever seen. It were crooked. Had a hump on its back and purpose soap there in the cloth. For a while I couldn't think what it might be. Then when it come to me what it were, I couldn't hardly believe it. Yet there it were, no mistaking it, it were a hump. And it were meant to be a hump. The head weren't like no other head I ever seen in a show neither. The face had a big nose, what hook it down,
and a big chin, what hook it up, and a smiling mouth. Some kind of little pointy hat on the head. It curved it over with a wagger on the end of it. I've been so interested in the figure and the dead hand, I hadn't been taking no notice of no one round me. I put the figure and the dead hand in my pocket. I up it out of the hole with my feet sucking and squelching, and up the mounded dirt to the high walk and over the fence. Come down with a thump on the outside of the fence and sliding down the slippy bank into the ditch, which I come up out of it, soaking and sopping. And there was that black leader, waiting for me, with his yellow eyes, just standing there in the rain and waiting for me.
It took me a minute of reading it to realize it wasn't in straightforward English, if that makes sense. Like, it's kind of the way I think, in a strange way, the garbled syntax of it that is, from our standards, incorrect and unclear, but is also much more expressive.
He takes the bold and important step of the kind of Star Trek convention, whereby you boldly travel to completely unknown galaxies and discover strange alien races speaking standard English.
You can you? You do have limitations, don't you?
If you continue to disobey, from deeper in your mind, there are things even more unpleasant.
English. You know, it's kind of he you know, he gets, and it's not accidental that it's in a century in which, you know, humans have been preoccupied by language as a kind of both the field and the object of philosophical inquiry. You know, he stands the novel on its language in that way, which is a brave and brutal thing to do.
With Ridley Walker, it is partly the accent, partly a phonetic thing, but it's also, I think, what Russell Hoban is trying to do is just show how shattered the culture has been after the one big one, that language itself has been destroyed. I think it's reached a stage, and this is partly what the novel does, it's reaching a stage where there's suddenly this technological step forward in creating the one little one, the first sort of explosion.
I'd say to the new reader, really give it time and read it out loud. Try and think you're in the wreckage of something. You're picking up bits and pieces and you're trying to put it back together, just like they are.
So I just started reading it, and it was just immediately was completely hooked by the language. And of course, I'm a puppeteer, so as soon as I figured out that there were puppets involved, and fairly quickly knew that I wanted to make a show out of it. But there are some of them, and it's one of the things that I told my actors when they were, you know, naturally I tried to get all of them to read the book, and some of them took to it right off, and then some of them were like, I don't understand this, and I don't know, why are you making me do this?
The question is whether the language serves a fictional purpose. And again, what's so brilliant about Ridley Walker is that the obduracy of the language to begin with matches the obduracy of the protagonist's predicament. So in coming to understand the language and its limited capability through that to get a grip on its environment, you understand the mechanics of the powerlessness of the protagonist and the nature of the society he's in. So the two are a complete gestalt in that way. They're a collection of elements that work in a harmonious whole. I mean, it's possible to imagine doing it in a different way, but I think Hoban's way is just flat out genius, actually.
I found was interesting that you could read, and I'm sure that many British people would be horrified by the idea that you could read Ridley Walker with a Southern American accent, and it fits fairly well by that. But I mean, just the very first sentence of, on my 12th naming day, I gone front spear. You could say that in any English-speaking accent. You can say it in a Texas. On my 12th naming day, I gone front spear. You know, it is, as you say, it's a rural accent, applicable across all kinds of English speakers.
Yeah, I mean, this is it, and it's the way in which meaning shifts so radically over a few hundred years as well. And that's one of the things about Ridley Walker. I like that there's the little nuggets of the older culture that are still there, but even those have had their meaning shifted. Certainly the spelling's mangled, because the word programmed, you know, obviously that's a kind of computing technical word, but now used in a very different way, just as a kind of way in which you try and think ahead.
You know, and a lot of the poetry of the book is his joy. He takes joy in his language and in his way of articulating the world, and we interpret it. I think on your third or fourth reading, you start to see how poetic it is, how much it actually is a sort of beautiful evocation of just being a subject in the world. Once you start, you know, he's got people smoking hash joints rolled in Rizzlers, and you know the Punch Judy men are paid for their performances and cuts in deals of hash, and there's this kind of, you know, think, well, is this really what's going to survive? Isn't that going to date it 1970s or kind of when he wrote the novel? No, I mean.
In my book, in this desolate landscape in Kent 3,000 years from now, after civilization has been destroyed, the government is a crude sort of a thing that enforces its will by traveling heavies, and it promulgates its policies with traveling puppeteers who have the government show that establishes the government's moral and political authority. And eventually Riddley, in opposition to this show, puts together his own Punch show, which simply resists all that rubbish and goes its own way.
Mr. Punch, it's in him to do what it's in him to do, as Riddley would say. You put Mr. Punch on your hand and you just kind of sit back and he goes and he does the thing that he's going to do. And that, I've used my Punch puppet that I made for years and years and years. When we were doing cabaret style events, he would often be our MC, and he would get the proceedings going by popping up and speaking until someone threw something at him. But that, yeah, essentially he is, the way I think of him in terms of Riddley Walker is just that they have this their whole society is based on the notion of tragedy. You know, what has happened to them is this vast tragedy with no resolution, and they have authority in the Ram and the heavies and the Eusa show, and then what Punch is comedy and anarchy. So he's kind of the perfect antidote to their whole society.
You won't ever find Punch bringing up the rear of a parade behind a flag, or going to a church, or enlisting in a crusade because God wills it. Punch knows better than all that. Punch will do something because he wills it and because he wants it right now. He would not put on a swastika armband any more than he would put on a cross. He is that vital force that will not obey any rules and will do many, many wicked things, but is likely to do more things that are ultimately good than bad.
Again, that's Hoban's genius, was to have thought, well, what is something that's still present in the folk art of the society and still involves performative ideas, still involves, powerful allegorical characters, but it isn't Christianity, and that will kind of weirdly kind of take over. I mean, again, you'd have to say, I don't know. I haven't been to a English seaside resort in summer, and, I don't know whether you actually do still see actual Punch and Judy shows.
And I suspect that the Punch and Judy show is now not something that would be recognisable at all to a younger generation.
Now, Mr. Punch, you're not supposed to fry babies, are you, girls and boys? Hold on there a minute.
But the point of using it certainly is, as we see, Punch always kills the baby. This is the story of where we are.
I say, what's all the noise? Nothing? Nothing at all. Nobody else in the village?
This is the story of where we are. We kill our babies. That's what we need held up in front of us again and again. It's almost a kind of liturgical, sacramental moment. So what have we got that's like that? Our imagination is so fractured these days in terms of the stories that are around. Again, it's fragments, it's bits and pieces, it's a picture from here and a sound from there and a story from there, all bundled together. And the Eusa story is, it works at so many different levels.
Sat down then. Good parley inside the fit-up. Orphan standing by for the patter, looking at the fit-up. Nothing to see, only the red backcloth with black smoke and orange flames painted on it, and the empty space where Eusa would come up. Eusa come up then, slow and scanful like, always turning his wooden head this way and that, and his painted eyes taking us all in. This here what you're going to see. It happened way back, when I work it for Mr. Clever. He goes down, and he comes up with paper and pen and ink, and a measuring stick, and a triangle. He's writing. Pretty soon, Eusa comes up again. This time he's got like an iron hat on his head. 2 long wires coming out of the top of the hat, and little pegs on the ends of the wires. Plus there's a cranking handle on the side of the iron hat. Eusa says, 2 heads are better than 1. He takes them 2 wires coming out of his hat, and he pegs them into the holes in the box. He's turning that crank on his iron hat. Rrrr! Eusa says, now, let's see if it works. He's turning the crank on his iron hat some more then. He's inputting all kinds of knowing out of his head into the box. Mr. Clever comes up, and he's watching Eusa and listening to him. Eusa's mumbling all kinds of numbers and formulas. It sounds like he's inputting all the knowing there ever been in the whole world out of his head into that box. He's saying the numbers of the rainbow and the fire quanta. He's saying the smallering numbers and the biggering numbers. Plus, he might say, I've got the nuts and balls of it in that box, which is my number 2 head. But I've got the master program in my regular head. Nor it ain't just for you. It's good time for everybody. Mr. Clever says, you must be joking, Eusa. Who do you think you're working for? With that, he takes hold of the cranking handle on Eusa's iron hat, which the hat is still on Eusa's head, and the wires peg it into the box. Grrr! Mr. Clever's cranking that handle 10 times faster than Eusa ever done. When Mr. Clever finally leaves off cranking, you can see Eusa's well wore out. Mr. Clever, he says, let's see how much you know now. Can you tell me the numbers of the rainbow and the fire quanta? And how about 2 plus 2? What's your name? Eusa says, I don't know. Mr. Clever says, that's it then. I've emptied you out right enough. Now I've got the head with the knowing, and you've got the head with the nothing. He unconnects Eusa's wires, then he picks up the box, says, bye-bye, Eusa, all best. And off he goes. Eusa, standing there in his iron hat, with his wires hanging down, he don't have nothing to say.
It comes back to this point about the post-apocalyptic world. If you aren't prepared to follow Hoban's lead, and you're actually abandoning naturalism at that point. Language just does evolve, and we would really not. Wan that April with her sweet shures sooth the dracht of May, the opening of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, in what we imagine it might have sounded like to a contemporary. Most people down my local shop wouldn't understand that meant when April, with its sweet showers, flood the heat of May, it is time to go on a pilgrimage. I don't think they get that,
And let's be honest, most fiction is incredibly conservative, isn't it? If you're writing from a particular genre, you have to tick the boxes. You certainly don't want to stretch your reader in terms of what you're doing linguistically.
What it would have, speaking of somebody who's written a post-apocalyptic novel, the trouble with, it's just, probably everybody's got a post-apocalyptic novel in them. The question is which one you're actually going to write. When's it going to grab you to write it? And,
an explanation keeps a lot of readers involved as well, doesn't it? If you make it challenging for your reader to try and understand literally what's happening, let alone, in terms of language that they're trying to decode at the same time, that's a big thing.
Ultimately, if you start caring about your readers, then you're in trouble. It's not really I mean, except in the sense of an ideal reader who's a tautologist, who wants to read exactly what it is that you write. And I'm certain that Hoban was a serious enough writer that he only thought about that kind of ideal reader. Once you start to understand, and also, you know, I think Russell said to me that he a lot of what went into Riddley Walker was topographical, was a sense of place. And once you've read it a couple of times, you've got over the oddity of language, you start to see that it's a kind of book about going for a walking tour in Kent.